The phone call came at 9:47 p.m. Bruce Lee was in his home gym alone, practicing forms in the darkness. He didn't need light anymore. His body knew the movements, had performed them 10,000 times. 20,000. The phone interrupted his flow. He considered ignoring it, but something, instinct, intuition, whatever you want to call it, made him answer. "Mr. Lee, this is the White House calling." Bruce paused, wiped sweat from his face. "Is this a joke?" "No, sir. President Nixon would like to invite you to Washington. Tomorrow, if possible." 24 hours later, Bruce Lee walked through the gates of the most powerful building in America. It was February 1970. Cold. The kind of cold that cuts through clothing and settles in bones. Secret Service agents watched him with suspicious eyes. A Chinese martial artist. In the White House. During the height of Cold War paranoia. He could feel their tension, their hands hovering near weapons. Ready. Always ready. "This way, Mr. Lee." They led him through corridors he'd only seen on television. Past portraits of dead presidents. Past rooms where history had been made and broken. The carpet absorbed sound. Everything felt muffled, distant, like walking through a dream. Finally, they stopped at a door. The door. Oval Office. The agent knocked twice. A voice from inside. "Come in." Richard Nixon stood from behind his desk. Tall, broader than he looked on TV. The famous jowls, the ski-slope nose, the eyes that never quite seemed to look at you directly. He extended his hand. Bruce shook it. Firm grip. Politician's grip. Practiced. "Mr. Lee, thank you for coming on such short notice." "Mr. President, I'm honored." Nixon gestured to a chair. Bruce sat. Two Secret Service agents positioned themselves by the door. Silent. Watching. Nixon sat across from Bruce, leaning back, fingers steepled. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Just the tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Measuring seconds. Minutes, history. "I'll be direct," Nixon finally said. "I brought you here because I'm fascinated by what you do. Martial arts, the philosophy, the discipline, but also—" He paused, chose his words carefully. "I wanted to meet you. In person. Away from cameras. Away from handlers." Bruce nodded slowly. There was something Nixon wasn't saying. Something beneath the surface. "I appreciate that, Mr. President. Though I have to ask, why me? Why now?" Nixon stood, walked to the window, looked out at the rose garden, brown and dormant in winter. "Do you know what it's like, Mr. Lee, to feel like you're constantly being watched, constantly being judged, every word analyzed, every action scrutinized?" "I can imagine." "Can you?" Nixon turned. His eyes, for the first time, looked directly at Bruce. "Can you really? Or are you just being polite?" Bruce considered this. "No, you're right. I can't imagine being president. But I understand performance. I understand living under scrutiny. Every movie, every demonstration, people watching, waiting for mistakes, waiting for proof that I'm fake, that it's all Hollywood tricks." Nixon's face softened slightly, almost smiled. "Yes, exactly. You do understand." They talked for 20 minutes. About pressure, about expectations, about the weight of representing more than yourself. Nixon spoke about China, about his upcoming trip, about trying to open diplomatic relations after decades of hostility. "They think I'm betraying America," he said quietly. shaking hands with communists, but sometimes you have to talk to your enemies. Sometimes that takes more courage than fighting them. Bruce listened, watched, and slowly he began to notice things. Small things, Nixon's eyes darting to corners of the room, the way he lowered his voice when discussing certain topics. The paranoia wasn't just political. It was personal, deep, consuming. "Mr. President," Bruce said carefully, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you feel safe here, in this office?" Nixon's jaw tightened. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you keep looking at the walls, like you expect them to do something." For a moment, Nixon's mask dropped. Pure vulnerability flashed across his face. Then he caught himself. Politician's smile returned. "You're very observant, Mr. Lee. That's good. That's useful." Nixon walked to a bookshelf, pulled out a book, opened it. Inside was a small device, black, metallic. "This," he said, "is what paranoia looks like. I found this last week, in the cabinet room. A listening device. Someone is spying on the President of the United States." Bruce stood, approached, examined the device without touching it. "Have you had the entire building swept? 3 times. They keep finding more. And I keep wondering, how many are they missing?" That's when Bruce's training kicked in. Not the fighting, the other part. The awareness, the sensitivity to environment that separates masters from practitioners. He closed his eyes, breathed, listened. Not with ears, with something else, something deeper. The room had a frequency, a subtle hum, almost imperceptible, but there. "Mr. President," Bruce said slowly, "may I walk around your office?" Nixon gestured. "Be my guest." Bruce moved methodically, not searching, sensing. He'd done this in countless dojos, feeling the energy of a space, finding the imbalances, the disruptions. And there, along the wall, something felt wrong. He approached a framed photograph, American flag presentation. Nixon shaking hands with some general. Standard political photo. Meaningless. Except, "May I?" Bruce indicated the frame. Nixon nodded. Secret Service agents tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Bruce reached up, lifted the frame off its hook. Heavy, heavier than it should be. He turned it over, examined the back. The frame had a small gap, a separation in the wood. Bruce worked his fingers into the gap and pulled. The backing came away. Behind it, nestled in a hollowed-out section of the frame, another device. Smaller than the one Nixon had shown him, more sophisticated. Still warm, still active, still listening. The room went absolutely silent. Nixon stared. The Secret Service agents drew weapons, not at Bruce, but at the walls, the ceiling, everywhere and nowhere. The oldest agent spoke into his radio. "Code Black, Oval Office, now." Bruce held the device in his palm. It was beautiful, in a way, elegant. Someone had gone to extraordinary trouble to place this here. This wasn't amateur hour. This was professional, military grade. Which meant, who? Nixon's voice was barely a whisper. Who would do this? That was the question, wasn't it? Foreign power? Domestic rivals? Someone in his own administration? In 1970, the lines were blurred. Trust was currency, and everyone was bankrupt. Within minutes, the Oval Office filled with people. CIA, FBI, Secret Service supervisors. technical specialists with equipment Bruce didn't recognize. They swept everything and found 3 more devices, one in the desk lamp, one in the presidential seal woven into the carpet, one inside the telephone, the goddamn telephone the president used to call world leaders. Nixon sat through it all, stone-faced. But Bruce could see the calculation happening behind those eyes. Who knew he'd invited Bruce here? Who had access to the Oval Office? Who benefited from this information? The paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore. It was justified. It was real. 4 hours later, they sat in a different room, secure, swept 3 times. Just Bruce, Nixon, and one Secret Service agent who looked like he could kill with his pinky finger. "You saved me," Nixon said simply. "If those devices stayed active, the conversations I've had in that office, the things I've discussed." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. "You saved my presidency, Mr. Lee." Bruce shook his head. "I didn't do anything. Just happened to notice." "No," Nixon cut him off. "Don't diminish it. You have abilities, senses, training, whatever you want to call it. You perceived something that million-dollar equipment missed. 3 separate sweeps, professional security teams, and they missed what you found by feel." "What happens now?" Bruce asked. Nixon smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Now we find out who's responsible. Now we burn them to the ground, professionally, quietly, but thoroughly." He stood, extended his hand again. "And now, Mr. Lee, you have a friend in the White House. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call directly." He handed Bruce a card, blank except for a phone number. "This goes to my private line, not through operators, not through staff, straight to me." Bruce took the card, studied it. "Mr. President, I have to ask, why trust me with this? You just met me." "Because," Nixon said, "you didn't have to tell me about that device. You could have kept quiet, used it for leverage later, blackmail, favors. That's how Washington works. But you didn't. You showed me immediately. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." They shook hands. Bruce left through a side exit, unmarked car, no escort, like he'd never been there. Which, officially, he hadn't. No visitor log, no public record, just a ghost passing through history. The drive back to the airport was silent. Bruce stared out the window at Washington sliding past. Monuments to dead men. Buildings full of secrets. A city built on power and paranoia. He thought about Nixon, about the fear in his eyes when those devices were discovered, about how even the most powerful man in the world wasn't safe in his own office, about how trust was the rarest commodity in Washington. And he thought about the card in his pocket, a direct line to the president, a debt owed, a friendship formed in the strangest circumstances. What Bruce didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his visit had been observed. Not by the Secret Service, not by official channels, by others. Shadow watchers, people whose job was to notice anomalies. A martial artist invited to the White House with no official reason. A 4-hour lockdown of the Oval Office. Emergency sweeps. High-level meetings behind closed doors. These things created ripples. And ripples were noticed. In the intelligence community, there's a saying, "Witnesses are liabilities." Bruce Lee had witnessed something, had found something, had become part of something bigger than a simple security breach. He'd seen the fear in Nixon's eyes. He'd seen how vulnerable the presidency really was. He'd seen behind the curtain, And that made him dangerous. The card Nixon gave him, the one with the private number, it was real, but it was also a marker, a way to track contact. Every call would be logged, monitored, not by Nixon, but by the machinery around him. The vast security apparatus that protected and imprisoned every president. They would know if Bruce ever used that number. They would know what was discussed. They would know if he became a problem. Bruce kept the card in his wallet. Never called it. Never needed to. But he kept it. A reminder of that strange day. A reminder that he'd touched history. A reminder that sometimes being in the right place at the wrong time isn't lucky. It's dangerous. In the weeks after the Oval Office incident, Bruce noticed things. Small things. A car that seemed to follow him from the gym. A man reading a newspaper who appeared outside his house 3 days in a row. Phone calls where nobody spoke. Just silence and breathing. His wife Linda noticed his tension. "What's wrong?" she asked one night. Bruce wanted to tell her. About the White House. About Nixon. About the devices. But he couldn't. "Nothing," he said. "Just tired." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. And he knew, in that deep instinctual way that martial artists develop, that he was being watched, assessed, measured for threat level. The question was, by whom? And more importantly, what would they do about it? Bruce tried to go back to normal life. Training. Teaching. Preparing for his next film. But normal felt different now. Contaminated. He'd seen too much. Knew too much. And in Washington's world, knowledge was the most dangerous weapon. More dangerous than any listening device. More dangerous than any scandal. Because knowledge could be shared, could be leaked, could destroy careers and presidencies. And the people who protected those careers and presidencies, they didn't take chances. They eliminated problems before problems became crises. That was their job. That was what they did. And Bruce Lee, whether he wanted to be or not, had become a potential problem. He started making plans, quiet plans, moving more of his work to Hong Kong, spending less time in America, not fleeing exactly, but creating distance, options. If something happened, if someone came for him, at least his family would be safe. At least he'd see it coming. Or so he thought. But the thing about professional intelligence operations is that you never see them coming. They're patient, strategic. They wait for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right cover story. And when they move, it looks like accident, like coincidence, like natural causes. Nothing suspicious, nothing that triggers investigations. Just another death, another tragedy, another file closed. 3 years later, Bruce Lee collapsed in Betty Ting Pei's apartment in Hong Kong. July 20th, 1973. Rushed to hospital. Dead on arrival. Cerebral edema. Brain swelling. The official story said he'd taken a painkiller called equagesic. Allergic reaction. Tragic. Random. But there were inconsistencies. Bruce had taken that medication before. No problems. The autopsy showed strange findings. The level of swelling didn't match typical allergic reactions. The timeline didn't quite add up. And then there was the question nobody asked publicly. Why was he at Betty Ting Pei's apartment? Bruce was married. Happily, by all accounts. He had no reason to be there, unless he was meeting someone, unless he'd been asked to come, unless it was a setup. The conspiracy theories started immediately. Triads killed him. Chinese martial arts masters poisoned him for teaching foreigners. The Lee family curse. On and on. But nobody, not one investigator, not one journalist, connected Bruce Lee's death to his visit to the White House. Why would they? There was no record, no evidence, no connection, except that card in his wallet, found by Hong Kong police, photographed, filed. A phone number with no name, no explanation. Curious, they called it. Got a recording. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Dead number. Dead man. Dead end. But here's what happened behind the scenes. In August 1974, 14 months after Bruce's death, Richard Nixon resigned. Watergate. The scandal that destroyed a presidency. The famous tapes. Hours and hours of Oval Office conversations. And in those tapes, 18 minutes of crucial conversation mysteriously erased. Technical malfunction, they said. Accident. But audio experts said no. Deliberate. Someone erased that section. Multiple times. Making sure nothing could be recovered. Almost nothing. Because if you listen very carefully with professional equipment, isolate the frequencies, filter the noise, there are exactly 3 seconds that survived. 3 seconds where you can hear 2 voices. One is Nixon, the other is unidentified, speaking with a slight accent, Asian accent, Chinese accent, saying, "Mr. President, I think you should look at this frame." 3 seconds. That's all that survived. 3 seconds of proof that someone else was in the Oval Office during that 18-minute gap. Someone who found something in a frame. Someone whose voice doesn't match anyone on Nixon's staff. Someone whose identity has never been officially confirmed. But if you know the story, if you know about Bruce Lee's visit, if you know what he found, those 3 seconds confirm everything. Bruce Lee was there. Bruce Lee found the device. Bruce Lee saved Nixon from surveillance. And someone erased almost all evidence of it. What else was discussed in those 18 minutes? What else did Bruce find? What else did he know? The Secret Service agent who was present that day, the one who looked like he could kill with his pinky, he's still alive. In his 80s now, living in Montana, retired, silent. But in 2019, a journalist found him, asked him about that day, about Bruce Lee, about what really happened. The old agent smiled, said nothing for a long time. Then, Bruce Lee had a gift, not just fighting, perception. He could sense things nobody else could. That day in the Oval Office? That wasn't luck. That was something else, something I can't explain. And yeah, we found bugs, multiple bugs, but Bruce found something else too. Something we were told to never discuss. Something that's still classified. And that's all I can say. That's all I'll ever say. What was the something else? We don't know. Probably never will. But it connects. It all connects. Bruce Lee, Richard Nixon, secret devices, erased tapes, a death 3 years later that doesn't quite make sense. A phone number that went dead, a card that marked a man, and the nagging question, if Bruce Lee's death was just a tragic accident, why did the CIA have a file on him? Why did that file remain classified for 50 years? Why, when it was finally released in 2023 under Freedom of Information Act, were entire sections redacted? Black bars covering names, dates, locations, everything that might explain why the CIA cared about a martial artist and movie star. History is full of holes, gaps, mysteries, and in those gaps, truth hides. The truth about Bruce Lee's visit to the White House. The truth about what he found. The truth about what he knew. The truth about whether his death was really just cerebral edema or something else. Something darker. Something that powerful people needed to stay buried. We'll probably never know for certain. But we have fragments. 3 seconds of tape. A blank card with a dead number. A Secret Service agent who won't talk. A file with redactions. A death that came too soon. And the feeling that sometimes the official story isn't the whole story. That sometimes being a hero in the wrong situation can be the most dangerous thing in the world. Bruce Lee saved Richard Nixon's presidency that day in February 1970. And maybe, just maybe, that's why Bruce Lee had to die. But there's one more piece to this puzzle. One more fragment that doesn't fit anywhere but demands attention. In 2020, a former CIA analyst published a memoir, heavily redacted, approved for publication only after extensive review. In it, he mentions, briefly, a file he saw in 1973, a file coded with unusual classification markings. Inside were photographs, surveillance photographs, of Bruce Lee, taken in the months before his death. The analyst writes, "I remember thinking it was odd. Why would we be surveilling a movie star? But then I saw the date stamps. Some were taken in Washington, some outside known CIA safe houses, some at airports, train stations, places that suggested travel we weren't officially tracking. And there was a notation, just 3 words, handwritten in the margin. Knows too much." I never saw that file again. When I asked about it later, I was told no such file existed. But I saw it. I held it. And I've never forgotten those 3 words. Knows too much. 3 words that explain everything and nothing. Bruce Lee knew something. Something worth photographing. Something worth monitoring. Something worth, perhaps, eliminating. Was it just the listening devices? Or was it something more? Something he found in those 18 erased minutes? Something that, if revealed, would have changed history? We'll never know. The files are sealed. The witnesses are silent or dead. The evidence is erased, redacted, buried. All we have are questions, and the uneasy certainty that sometimes heroes don't die of natural causes. Sometimes they're silenced, professionally, quietly, permanently. And sometimes the greatest cover-up isn't hiding a crime. It's making sure nobody ever knows there was a crime to hide. Bruce Lee saved Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon, whether he meant to or not, may have signed Bruce Lee's death warrant. Not with malice, not with intent, but by bringing him into a world where secrets are worth more than lives, where knowledge is lethal, where being in the wrong room at the wrong time, finding the wrong thing, can make you a target you'll never see coming. That's the real story, the one that's still classified, the one that will remain buried until everyone involved is dead, and the truth can't hurt anyone anymore. Until then, we have fragments, whispers, 3 seconds of tape, and the ghost of Bruce Lee, forever walking the halls of the White House, finding secrets that should have stayed hidden,